Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 2 from 1974. So yes, here it is on Blu-ray, and we are here back again with, of course, the sequel slash prequel to the first Godfather film behind me, of course. And yes, this is, of course, the second part in this trilogy, and of course, spoilers review here once again. So if you've not seen the first two films, actually, be warned, I won't be talking about the third really, but yes, these two films, spoilers review here. So yes, finally we're here with this film. I reviewed, of course, the original, and this is, I'm guessing this will be up shortly after that one, the review. So yes, what can I say about this film? This film is something else, of course, and if you've seen my my review of the first Godfather film, you'll know, of course, that I am kind of in agreement with those, because of course there is a split, almost at times 50-50 split really, but a bit of an edge for the first to what is the better film, and it's always for me a respectful kind of raising of opinions of the film. I know a lot of people get heated about it. There's no need for that. This is just opinions, and these films, of course, these two films are just so fine. Let's say that that it doesn't really matter at all. What you prefer, but I have said in that review that I do personally prefer this film, and the original Godfather. It's in my, as I say, pretty much in my top 10. I'm not going to say much more than that, but of course, yes, this film, I think pretty much every way, it just, this is, the greatest, if I was asked, the greatest Coppola film. The Godfather Part 2 is my pick. I think this really is one of the rare films that, just comes very, very close to, being the finest film ever made, actually. It's definitely right up there, very close to the heights of cinema. Coppola for me, just on this occasion, goes even further than the first, just into these heights. Spiritually, emotionally, cinematically. This is the Coppola film from me personally. I think very, very few films I've seen are better than this, and more meaningful and more just wowing. Let's just face it, this film. It's certainly an epic. This has got more of an epic treatment, I feel, to the first. What I said about that film, of course, literally couldn't have praised it more. But this film, I saw this for the first time roughly, very shortly after the first one. The first one, of course, I saw when I was 10, coming on to, the age of 11. This was probably around about 11 I saw this. And yes, I think... I instantly kind of thought, and I'd heard some things about the second, and I obviously knew De Niro was in the film, so it's kind of like a, wow, you're going to see these two in a film. They don't share, of course, the same scenes, but they're portraying, the two dons, of course, the father and son across different time periods. This is an absolutely genius piece of cinema. I mean, this is something else, godlike film this, but yes, I saw this and I thought instantly, is it better? Is it better than the first? And I kind of thought, I probably do prefer it. And of course, sometimes when these films are this good and this close, you feel, it takes maybe a few rewatches to kind of just, be more confident on this kind of thing. And maybe I was kind of doubting myself because, I think even back then, maybe a bit more, the first was more popular and stuff. I think this has grown every kind of year. It's grown and grown, this film, particularly this one, to now kind of, it's very even, I feel, it seems, with the kind of the regarding, the quality of these films, and yes, I think I was kind of maybe slightly doubting myself, or just kind of thinking, did I maybe kind of get ahead of myself, and it was it's kind of like maybe the first, but really after a few times, and certainly for many years now, I have considered the second part to be, the superior, the supreme, undertaking here. I think, pretty much every way. I think maybe I would say that the script, or not just the dialogue, I think between different, maybe one-liners and stuff, you could kind of give the edge to the first. But what really does that mean? Because this is, it is cinema, and I think this film it's very, very different, and I think actually it's much more of a visual film. I think it's much more of a kind of a silent film at times, of course, and these big, big operatic sequences. They tell the story more, you could say, than kind of a traditional. This is definitely not not quite as classical, in its form, and traditional as the first at times. But then it is with the De Niro flashbacks in a way, but it's kind of not. It's very, very complex, this, in the way that Coppola went about this, and he insisted of calling it, of course, of calling it part two. Despite the kind of, as always, the studios didn't want many, many things in this, but he pushed once again, and he had more control over this. That's all I'll say there in terms of the production, because we are judging the film, and all I can say is this. From the opening, we have this kind of, I don't judge the opening scene as, Michael in the chair and stuff, but after that, kind of just epic moment, we have young Vito. We have him in 1901. We go to the flashback, of course, with his origins, of course, the Don Corleone, of course, that became this legendary character in the first Godfather film. We are seeing him, this is a treat, we are seeing the flashbacks and his rise to power, while also, of course, going further. I mean, you couldn't quite believe, it goes further, into darkness with, of course, Michael Corleone, Al Pacino, but it does, it really, really does. That's, of course, the parallels, the two different, kind of narratives. It's dual narrative, this, mirroring, of course, and so much different things going on. But yeah, I do consider this, of course, just kind of part of the original. I don't like to split them up too much, only for kind of lists maybe at times, and kind of just people talking to me about the films. But I do consider it the same kind of creation, these two parts, and they work in harmony. But we have this flashback. You see text, of course, and you learn that his father has just been recently killed, for insulting this Don Chichi, and yes, that is the initial scene, and then of course his brother is killed, his older brother, and then his mother is killed brutally, and there we have it. This opening scene. I think from the get-go, there's a real difference here. I think, and the flashbacks in general to this film, literally, for me, in so many regards, only a handful of films really are better than this. These sequences in particular, I think they're overall the best parts of the film for me. And I think really some of these parts in this flashback sequences, this whole story here, I think contender for the greatest scenes in cinema. That's how good they are, I think. And this initial kind of opening scene sequence, I think, or act, if you want to call it that, is just one of the most legendary and instantly emotional, creations. This is, it brings me to tears more and more each time, and this whole kind of this legendary character, this peaceful but also, of course, kind of fierce character, of course, that we had in the first film. You see the origins, and it's so emotional. This, you see him as a 9-year-old, of course, just a 9-year-old, and he's forced to flee his hometown from his family that, of course, just been brutally killed, or all of his family here, and then, of course, coming to America. Wow, it really, really is. It sets up everything here. This tragic story. The whole mythology in this film is deepened to the point that it's just unbelievable. And I think one of the things about this film is the mythology. This whole kind of this legendary kind of mythic feel this film has. The whole kind of family here, and the history of the family is so deepened in this film. And I think this film, it has a weird kind of thing. It enriches the first film, just like some of the best sequels do. And I think, well, in terms of second installments, this is probably the best I've ever seen. It really, really is, in terms of the quality anyway. And yes, this film, it just goes further into the depths of this family, and into cinema. This is some undertaking, and of course, we see young Vito, and of course he's described as a kind of dim-witted boy, and stuff. He doesn't not really doesn't really talk. And you know, there's a moment, of course, just towards the end of this whole kind of first sequence, and when he does, he of course, he's completely silent until then, but then he starts singing, and yeah, it's just that moment even is just one of the most wow, wonderful scenes I've ever witnessed. And then of course, you know, we'll get to the transition, you know, in this film, the whole kind of editing in this film, the way it kind of you know, transitions to different times, you know, that's kind of something, you know, in itself. But yes, you have this opening sequence, the kind of just the epic scope this has instantly, you know, is remarkable. Really, really is, and it has such a power, you know. And seeing, of course, the first film, and you know, knowing how much this means, you know, this whole story, and seeing this reveal, of course, this whole kind of backstory to the Don, you know, to Vito, is so powerful. And then, you know, once he of course gets pursued, you know, by this family, you know, Don Chichi, you know, is of course sending people out to hunt him down, you know, and of course the part where, of course, he's in hiding and he's getting transported. You know, then we hear something. We hear something, and as a viewer, you know, it's something for the first time I couldn't quite believe my ears. You know, it really is. I'm not, you know, overreacting here. The music to this film, you know, and the first film has, you know, one of the best scores in film, but this film, once again, of course, composed by Nino Rota, but this film, you know, it goes many steps further, in my opinion. The Immigrant Theme, it's referred to as mainly, absolutely mind-blowing. This is a contender for, you know, one of the top 10, I feel, film scores of all time. You know, it's absolutely, you know, it's something else. I'm not even going to call it anything, you know, it just is, you know, beyond so much I've ever heard. You know, it's something completely, you know, connected to everything, you know, the history of this, you know, not just for this particular family, the Corleones, and, you know, and Vito, but, you know, I think just, you know, many people, you know, coming to America, you know, the American dream. It's all about this one, even more than the first film. You know, it really is such a moving sequence when, of course, these you know, these individuals, you know, of course, coming to America, and you see the Statue of Liberty, and, you know, they're coming on the boat, and you know, the music, of course, just absolutely one of the most mesmerizing, shiver-worthy, powerful, you know, scenes of all time. And, you know, ending, of course, with young Vito, and then, you know, there's so much in this sequence, 10 minutes really, and then transitioning to his grandson, as we see in the wonderful text, of course, this transition, you know, that's the first, you know, kind of transition here with the kind of fade, and, you know, there's just so much tears within the first 10 minutes of this film, and it's only just begun. Then we have the grandson, of course, and yes, you know, Anthony, you know, of course, and we see, of course, Michael Corleone, and of course the film, as we know, has two different, you know, kind of it has these parallels, this dual narrative we have going on here, you know, with Michael and Vito, you know, intertwining here, you know, and of course it was, you know, it was met with kind of a mixed, you know, response maybe. First, I feel, I've heard anyway, and you know, it was soon after that it was recognised. You know, this film, not that I really, you know, we don't really talk too much about the Oscars on this channel, but certainly, you know, this film, you know, maybe because of the first was more recognised and stuff by that point, but, you know, this got 6 Oscars, you know, and I think 74 was even even more of a kind of competitive year. So, you know, it says everything really. You know, this is the film that got Best Picture, you know, the first sequel to ever do that, and you know, that's something else. You know, and of course, you have just you know, so much going on here. You know, it's this dual narrative. You know, and it's just you know, this film goes and goes, and it tops itself constantly. I feel this film, to a point where it just goes into the very, very heights of cinema. You know, for me, right near the top, you know, of best films of all time. You know, it's very, very close to the top. There's a few films I think that I would say are better than this, but really, really not too many. You know, certainly one of the very, very finest films, and you know, it's just wow. This film, you know, it's just stunning. It really is. It's just a sublime piece of work, and this is just especially when viewed very close to the first film. What you can kind of I feel constantly is this looking back to the first. That's what the film does, while looking further back into the very origins of the kind of the whole Vito the kind of narrative here. You have also just looking back to the first film, and I think it really has to be compared to the first in so many ways, because it's very linked. It's very much part of the same sort of creation here, the same story, and just there's moments where I kind of just look back to the gentility and the kind of the warmth of course Vito in the first Godfather film, and it's something that it's so sad to see how of course what Michael has become, and in the Godfather Part 2, and just really is it's something that's so moving, so tragic. Our protagonist here, how from the very the first scene in the first Godfather film, and how kind of, as I said in that review, how kind of innocent he is at first, and how kind of just kind of likable, and someone you root for constantly. But then you've got this whole kind of, towards the end of that first film, you have this descent into darkness. It becomes very cold towards the end of the film, and something his father was not. And then in this film, it's this is extremely dark. This film, it really it's a sad film. This really is, and I think it affects me so much to see, just in itself, this character of Michael just going further into darkness and into despair, the isolation that's portrayed in this film, and the contrast, of course, with the warmth, the true kind of family man that Vito was. Michael isn't quite, actually we learn towards the end of this film as well, that the whole kind of final scene, is to kind of show how, actually, even back then, Michael was, in many regards, on his own. He was very cut off from the family. He wasn't quite, in many regards, one of them. In so many ways, he was very isolated and lonely. And it's a very sad film. This, and I think just the way that I look back to the first, and also the way that it shows this whole timeline, this epic timeline. Of more than 50 years is portrayed in this film. It truly is staggering, and just such a meaningful experience. One that it's one of the grandest films in the history of cinema. I think while it is more of a kind of a majestic, grand, epic film, I think this one actually, and it's more of course, a sweeping film, more grand, as I say, and majestic. But I think this film also goes, at the same time, more personal. I think it's even more of a personal and moving film than the first. And of course, as just to say, anything I say that's better on this, in this film to the original, there's no way I'm dismissing the original, because as I say now, actually, can't quite believe that I'm saying that so many things, and overall, this film is better than the first. It's just a rare case. It really is, and I think that film is just absolutely perfect. But this film, it's shockingly even better. And I think, this film is constantly kind of showing these transitions and these big epic moments. It's more kind of operatic, but it's actually while it's got less characters in this film, it's not got Sonny. James Caan, of course, did not really return, apart from for the final scene. He's not in the rest of the story, of course. In the rest of the film, he's in that one scene at the end, and there's no Marlon Brando. There's no quite a lot of other characters from the first film, not really in the film, at least too much, you could say. But it has got, of course, the deepening of the remaining characters' relationships. You've got, of course, Tom Hagen being one. His relationship with Michael, especially, is just so moving in this film. The scene, especially in the first hour of the film, it brings me to tears. That moment, it's absolutely stunning. And just when he says, he always wanted to be thought of as a brother to Michael. That is a wonderful moment. It's just a lovely moment there, so human. And of course, the other character being Fredo, he is, one of the main focuses of this film. The relationship between Fredo and Michael, which of course is even more kind of tragic in this film, but it's also, I think, just more personal and moving. This film really, it moves me more. It does so much, kind of, I can't quite describe, but it also does more with the personal drama of the film. Connie, of course, as well. It's all this stuff. These characters that had more kind of, you could say, more plot. In the first film, and more kind of, big events. Maybe more iconic moments. But I think in terms of the actual pure drama between the characters here, the family drama and the personal, I think actually it's even more heightened in this film. And I think I'm just certainly that last hour, the exchanges between Michael, Fredo, and Connie, and Kay as well, Diane Keaton, wonderful in this film. She really is just absolutely wonderful. So many people deserved Oscars if you're going to talk about that. But yes, I think that last hour in particular, with the kind of culmination of Michael, the Michael narrative in this film is just truly, truly emotional, literally non-stop. Very, very emotional for me. Truly something else. This film, and you've got the contrast, and of course, as we know, to the Vito storyline. This is something that just, I think the whole Vito story in this film, the flashback sequences, they're referred to as literally, as I've said, it really is very close to being the best, moments in cinema for me. I think there's a whole kind of different feel to this. It's got more of a nostalgic feeling of this. This is a film that, even more than the first, deals with nostalgia, and just the whole kind of looking back to the past in many regards. Even in the flashback sequences, the way that the characters are kind of comparing with, they constantly refer to, Vito, of course, even in the main, the modern sequences, in the film. And I think it's truly just such even more of a meaningful experience, this film, and the way it's just so nostalgic to me, this film, the way it evokes this feeling, and the comparisons, of course, that are constantly made, how this is so felt from the characters. It's so powerful, this film, and just, I think the first hour is just mind blowing, and once again, wrapping you up in this whole kind of different story here. With Michael, it's very, very different here, and its whole kind of descent. And of course, it's maybe more for some people more complex. What's going on here, and it's different. There's more threads in this film, definitely. I think with Hyman Roth, of course, and Frank Pentangeli. Of course, these are great characters, by the way, and just these performances. Lee Strasberg, absolutely stunning. For example, in this film, there's such a warmth to these characters, even. But there's such a kind of, there's a lot going on here. And of course you go to Cuba. It's got such a scope, this film, and there's so much going on. But I think it just kind of gets more and more kind of more and more powerful with each passing hour to the film, and to the final hour of the film, and the second half, especially. Just it really is the greatest, I think, contribution to cinema that Coppola has ever given. This is a real gift. This film, and I think the second half of the film is hands down the best stuff that Coppola has ever conjured up. I feel, and everyone involved, of course, but the way this film is just brought together, it just really blows my mind, and it's such a mythic film. This, it's one of the most legendary experiences in cinema, and this whole kind of this second half, we'll get to the kind of one of the centerpieces of the film, which I am completely obsessed with, and it's literally, I think, a contender for the best sequence in cinema. But yes, this whole kind of bringing together of these themes, family, and the whole kind of the way as well, we see this tragedy of Fredo, the betrayal, of course, which is so sad. This is it's really, really moving to me, and I think you just look back to the first, and I always felt betrayed by Michael, and how could he have killed his brother. How could this have happened? And it's just to the end of the film, it's just actually, you could actually call Michael evil at times. He really is just taken over by this, just almost evil. Yes, it really is a shocking film. This, and of course the exchanges with Kay. I've rarely been more kind of affected by a film than this. This whole kind of story here. With Kay. This relationship, and how of course she has an abortion in the film, and then Michael's reaction. That scene is one of the best acted scenes in cinema. You literally feel the kind of the kind of the rage from Michael just building up. That moment there. With the just look into his eyes. That moment there is really up there with the best, pieces of acting in film. Even De Niro's pieces, some of his, performances, and I think just his eyes there. You know it. You know what's happening there, and of course, the blow. Of course, he hits his wife, Kay, and I just think that is one of the most shocking moments in a film ever. And this whole kind of last hour of the film is just really, really shocking and dark and brutal, and just sad, in this sense. But then, the Vito storyline just is one of the most uplifting, pieces of cinema as well. This is a real contrast, but it never feels, like it's not perfectly brought together. The every single moment, when there is a flashback and a kind of, a kind of a transition to a different time period, it really is perfect. There is not a single moment where it doesn't, kind of say something and kind of, contrast. It really is all for an effect here, and kind of what it's saying about the two, the contrast here between the two dons, and this this family, and how it's kind of times have changed, in many regards, and it really says so much. This film, it has, everything that the first film has, with kind of honor and kind of family, and legacy, but it kind of deepens these themes, and it also enriches the first film. And I think they kind of work in harmony, of course. And I think it's always advised, I feel, to watch the two in roughly the same sort of time, maybe within a week at least, I feel. But it really is something, I think. And yes, this whole kind of the progression of these two narratives, they perfectly come together, and in many, many different ways, but they are very much connected. You feel this kind of whole spiritual feeling that just connects, over 50 years worth of kind of, these individuals, this family across, this time. It's a true epic, this film, an epic saga, and the way I'm so involved in this family, and the whole legacy of the family, and the whole mythology of this. I'm in awe of this film, and it makes you think. Maybe you wander back further, into the family history, and also, maybe at the end of the film, thinking what's going to happen next. And the third film came along, but we'll get to that once I rewatch that film. But it's a film where you're just constantly thinking about this whole world that Coppola's created, and not just what's on film, but what kind of hasn't been shown, and kind of just so invested, so interested in this, so compelled by this, and so emotionally attached to these characters. It's a real magnum opus. That's an understatement. This film is literally probably one per franchise, certainly top 10. I feel best films ever made. I think it's absolutely outstanding. This is one of the pinnacles of cinema, and just let's talk about that kind of that whole arc. That kind of Shakespearean, mind-blowing arc of course, Vito coming to power, particularly with Don Fanucci. Yes, everyone knows what I'm on about. This is some of the greatest stuff I've ever witnessed. This whole thread here, this whole arc, and how Vito, kind of takes over here, from his humble beginnings. Of course, it just really is one of the high points of cinema for me, and the whole, of course, you see Clemenza in this film, you know, the younger version. You also see Tessio, and it's just so wonderful and so joyous at times to see this. And I think when we get to that moment, you know, when De Niro, of course, you know, and De Niro in this film, let's talk about De Niro, you know, the acting across the board, you know, is absolutely outstanding. But De Niro gives a contender for, you know, the greatest performance of all time in this film. I feel, you know, it really is probably his second best performance. You know, but in many regards, it is, you know, it's his kind of his finest kind of outing here. You know, I think absolutely mind blowing here. You know, just you know, every single mannerism, you know, that kind of, you know, he is kind of giving off is just so convincing to, you know, what you kind of feel that Vito would have been at this time. You know, it's so perfect, and his portrayal of this character, and you know, kind of what I'm going to say here is very controversial, but I think while Marlon Brando was just mind blown in the first, I feel the portrayal in this, you know, of Don Corleone is actually even better. I think, yes, De Niro gives an even finer performance than Brando in the first film, you know, and it's just, you know, to say that, you know, of course, these two got an Oscar for portraying the same character, which is so amazing. But of course, I think the edge, I feel, you know, really does. I think I'd give it to De Niro. I think that is a real testament to his talent, and I think just the gentility of this and the warmth, and you know, as well as just the power, the emotion to this. But you come to the moment, of course, when you have that kind of festival that goes on, of course, in the central part of the film, and this is, of course, the death of Don Fanucci, and wow, you know, wow. For me, I've always thought, you know, this is one of the contenders for the, I'm not saying it's the best scene, but sequence, but I think it's a contender for the finest, most mind-blowing sequence in cinema. All the elements here, you know, really just for what cinema really is. I think the use of music, you know, the operatic nature that it has, you know, the context within the story, the kind of way that this is just a power shift here. You know, this is the destiny, you could say, of Vito coming through here, the fulfillment here, and his, you know, his rise. You know, really, this is one of the defining moments, not just in this Godfather story, but in cinema. I really think that, and this whole, you know, sequence here is just mind blowing. You know, the music here, you know, the cinematography. Wow, you know, the moments, of course, the tracking shots, you know, on the rooftops, which is just so shiver-worthy, so epic, you know, and enthralling, and just wow, you know, this is just unbelievable, this film. And you know, of course, when he's down the streets after, of course, the death, you know, the killing of Don Fanucci, you know, with of course the fireworks, you know, everything going off, and him just walking through there, that tracking shot side on there, it's just, you know, all this the combination, and of course the death itself, you know, the way that is constructed there is absolutely mind blowing. This is masterful cinema, particularly in this sequence. Really, for me, probably in many regards the best sequence in the Godfather films. I think it's absolutely mind blowing. Wow, this is stunning, and just then, of course, going back to his family, you know where he, you know, he's doing all this for. It's so complex, this film, but so, I think these Vito sequences, you know, are just so pure and you know, uplifting, and also tragic, but you know, I think and kind of brutal, but there's a real purity and uplifting feel that I get from this, and it's treated, you know, as a silent film, and just I think it really is just some of the most moving and wondrous you know, sequences in cinema. And I think this explosive kind of operatic, you know, sequence is just, for me, the best sequence of the film, really, for me. And you know, as I say, across all of cinema, really, it's one of the very best you know, that I've ever seen. And yes, just you know, overall, this film, you know, is truly something else. You know, one of the true magnum opuses, you know, in cinema. And I just think, once again, you know, the visual storytelling, you know, to this film is just, I think the first is just remarkable. This film, really does go beyond, the first, just in overall visual storytelling. I think the cinematography to this film is absolutely unbelievable. I would say it's one of the rare films that actually probably surpasses the visual storytelling of Days of Heaven. Now that is something that I never really say too much. This is certainly this film in the top five films just in general for cinematography. I think the way that Coppola, and Gordon Willis, of course, once again working together, these guys, and the way that Coppola reveals information to us as a viewer, the way he just, the framing of the film, I think is even greater than the first. I think there's so many moments in this film, that are just absolutely stunning in the way that they're kind of framed. There's a scene, of course, with Clemenza, the rug. That scene is just absolutely amazing. The tension there and the way that, how everything just, it's just like a story in itself. This film is like a painting. It's kind of, I hesitate when saying this, but yeah, it's kind of at times a little bit comparable to Barry Lyndon in the way it's kind of like a painting that moves. It really, really is. It's one of them rare films that just, it can kind of be mentioned maybe, in the same sort of sentence as, Barry Lyndon or something. It really, really is. I think just the way that Coppola frames every single scene and the way that it just, there's such a spatial awareness, in this film. It's absolutely immaculate, and the whole kind of the way that characters are placed within the frame. To say things about the power shifts, who's in charge, of course, the way that Michael is framed in this film, the way the shadows are used. I think, of course, that the contrast between this such wonderful, nostalgic, warm tones of the flashbacks with this very, very very dark, kind of visuals of the Pacino, kind of Michael, of course, narrative here. It's just something else. And it seems like over the film it gets darker and darker with the visuals. The color tone of Michael's arc, and then the Vito, moments. Just so kind of nostalgic and warm, and just the yellow tone. That I mentioned, of course. With the first one, it's even heightened here. I think, clearly setting out to kind of recreate, the feeling, nostalgic feeling of a past time, and to say they achieved this, would be one of the understatements that I've ever made. It really just, it goes above and beyond, what they set out to do here, in every regard, but the visuals, the recreation of this time. This is art. This really, really is. I'm just in awe of this, and it's so passionate. One of the things about this film that it kind of, that I of course praise so much in the first, is the kind of way it just the theme of culture, Italian culture especially, and I think this film just goes further. He really, I think Coppola infuses this into the film, and just for example as well, just I think the way he includes theatre, and celebrations, the festival moments, of course, with the Don Fanucci death, and how it kind of acts, it's kind of like this merging of theatre and cinema, in a very particular way, not, it's not like other films, it's very, very particular, this, and I think that's one of the sequences that really highlights this, and the way that he's showing culture in such an uplifting way, but he's also showing tragedy, and there's something about the way he kind of uses other art forms within this. I think the way he brings this to the cinema here is, I think, his greatest kind of achievement here, in his whole career. I think this is the one that really, really is just the pinnacle. I think he's just absolutely stunning in every regard. I think what he's doing here, in terms of pushing, what his material, the art form here, is just, it really is, quite unbelievable, this film, the way that it does so much here, it just elevates to such a spiritual level, and, I think there's almost as well, there's so much, I think the heightened effect of the kind of, the tragedy and everything, but the way that the different characters in the film are portrayed in this mythic quality as well. You know, Don Fanucci as well. I think the whole kind of the way he is portrayed, but then you know with Vito as well. This whole kind of this takeover, this kind of you know rise, and this way that the kind of the way people rise and fall in this these flashbacks. I think it really is something to behold. And then you've got that the whole kind of way it ends with Don Chichi, and the final you know kind of moment where he, you know, Vito returns to his hometown, you know, where his family was killed, his mother, of course, in front of him, returns to that place, you know, and, you know, the gates, you know, this is a moment when I first saw it, I just couldn't, I was kind of just, of course, you know, and this is another thing of visual moments, there's no kind of, nothing coming up here, you know, nothing on screen to say, oh, this is, it's just a key moment here in visual storytelling. We know, we remember this, the gates, of course, and the location, that drive through there, you know, and that kind of lane there, that road, and then, you know, you kind of hit you, oh, wow, you know, this is going to be a moment where he returns to maybe seek revenge, and yes, there it is, you know, it's just one of the most, you know, just epic moments, I think, in film, this whole kind of, the way it comes together there, the resolution, and it's very brutal. There's none of this film is once again like the first. It's not, you know, kind of it doesn't hold back. But I think there's actually more of a poetic feeling to this one in its violence and everything than the first. But you know, it's still a brutal film. And there's that moment, of course, with the, you know, that's a brutal moment. But it's so kind of just, it's just such a kind of poetic moment as well. It's very complex film, of course, and you know, I think even more so than the first. But you know, I think all the flashbacks in this film, in particular, are really something that I can describe. While it's brutal and everything, and you know, shocking, I really can describe this as a wonderful sequence, wonderful story here, a wonderful narrative. I think it's just beautiful. It really is. I think as well the way that the in regards to how wonderful it is and how uplifting this is, I think the way that we see how different members of the family are born. You know, you've got Sonny, of course, being the eldest, and then you've got showing Fredo and how he was ill as a kid, you know, with pneumonia, and it's so beautiful, isn't it? You know, just seeing this whole family and the creation here, and how it all came about. And I think the way it's handled is with the utmost sincerity and just beauty. You know, there's such purity to this. It really is, you know, right up there with the most pure films I've seen. You know, as I say, it's kind of like a silent film in the way that this is shown. This whole Vito flashbacks, just in general. But you know, and then just contrasting, as I say, to this really dark and kind of traumatic and shocking and you know, just disturbing narrative of Michael. I really, once again, am shaken. Just how can this protagonist from the first film, you know, how this likable guy, you know, become someone who kills his brother? You know, this is really shocking, and it's just a testament to how involving this film is. You know, how involving both the films are. You know, and how Coppola has created, you know, such this narrative that's got such a scope to it, and a tragedy, and you know, all these twists and turns, you know, these power shifts, but this descent, you know, from the beginning of the first film, you know, of Michael, you know, into the ending of part two, you know, is something that really gets me. It really moves me, and just makes me very sad. But you know, it's not a film. You know, it's not quite as you know, kind of. It's not a completely dark film, because you've got the kind of the flashbacks, of course, and you have got, you know, some uplifting moments, some moments of comedy still, you know, in these Pacino, you know, it's Pacino narrative. But you know, and I think as well, because it focuses so much on the personal side of the family, and the way it just really moves me. These touching moments with Connie, especially as well. You know, in the final hour, the final scenes, of course, when she speaks to Michael about Fredo. It's all this stuff that's just the value that is placed on family. I think it's just a bit finer for me, and more powerful, more pure than the first one. And hopefully I've explained, you know, why I think it's just more of a moving experience for me. But it's a combination of so many elements. When you talk about cinema, it's very hard sometimes to say everything, and why, you say that you prefer this, to this. I hopefully have explained, but, there's still things I can't, or maybe don't want to talk about because it's just so, maybe just so felt rather than understood. And I think that's a real, when I'm kind of not stumped, but really, maybe, not fully, after how many times I've seen this film, over 10 times, I can't fully explain everything, my feelings on particular moments in the film. That's when you've got a genius film here, by a genius filmmaker. I think this is, just an absolute magnum opus. I think the editing and the cinematography I would place it really in the top 5, in cinema, in terms of just edited films and cinematography in films. I think for both of them, I'd put them in the top 5. This film, I think, just really exceeds so many films. It's there's some film. I think the transitions, beautiful. The moments that just, that come before, and go. It just is so perfect in the way it transitions between the times, and the recreation of the past, and also the way it's portraying how times are changing, and how there's a real contrast of warmth, and kind of what's going on here with the family and across the different generations, and how Vito is compared, of course, to to Michael as a Don, and how he kind of handles this, and how he as we know, that's the real key thing here. We know that in the end that Michael it's not quite the family man that you thought he would be. He's not really this at times. He is much more kind of isolated from this. He's not in the end warm like his father was in that way, and it's something that he causes the destruction of this family in many regards. And because Fredo, of course, the motivations there, this is just genius filmmaking, so masterfully written, but the motivations of Fredo really becomes clear, of course, in that final hour of the film, and why he kind of turned. It's just everything in this film, that's the thing, it's so rich and so detailed, and how all the motivations come through. You've got the reasons for all these actions from these characters that are so believable and so vivid, the way they're brought to the screen. And I think the acting is just legendary acted in this film. Diane Keaton, Talia Shire, just of course Al Pacino, De Niro, for me the best in the film. Just absolutely wonderful performance here. A contender of his best. I think that's still a Deer Hunter, but very, very close there. And of course John Cazale, I think what a wonderful individual, and very tragic that he was only in a few films, but as we know, those films were legendary undertakings, all nominated for Best Picture. There's five main films there, and this is, I think Fredo is probably his the greatest character really, that he portrayed. I think just the level of vulnerability that he brings to this character across these two films, but particularly here, the way that he kind of breaks down in desperation for Michael, it's really truly moving to me. I think I just connect to this film so much, and the way it just, wow, it really moves me to the core, and the way it's just what it's saying about family here. I think it's not done in the way the first is done. It's not quite as much of an ensemble, but I think it's just a bit more pure and more emotional to me, and it moves me more, even more, than the first. And I think in many regards it's more epic, as I say. It's more of a kind of a felt film. There's not as much of these maybe memorable, kind of lines of dialogue, as the first. It's not, clearly not by loads of people as quoted, but I think, the script is masterful. It's one of the best, and quite close to the first, but it's not quite in the way. But I think it's because it's more of a visual undertaking, this, and more of a kind of it's told through actions, and just visual storytelling. I think is just for me finer in this film, and I think as well even finer than Apocalypse Now. So I think this is the best. In Coppola's career, I think it's his truest magnum opus, just in my opinion, of course. And I understand Apocalypse Now is some some masterpiece. And so is the first Godfather, but this film, I think it just goes further for me in its purity, the spiritual feeling I get from it. You know, the emotional core it has. You know, the narrative is not, it's not as linear. Of course, it's not. I can see kind of clearly. You know, it's not as accessible for many people, and they prefer the first. But I think, and I understand that completely. You know, no doubt, I think I can understand how someone would say the first is better, but I personally think this one's even better, and I definitely think one of the very finest films in cinema. You know, there's so many moments in this film, as I've said, that are just so moving, and I think just the whole every kind of sequence and the way that it's edited and the way it's shot, the use of music, as I say, is so operatic. You've got so many moments in this film that truly felt, it truly shakes me to the core. You know, the kiss of death, as it's referred to, as with Michael, Fredo, and you see the motivations coming through and the regret. It's dealing with so much in this film. I think even more so than the first, the regret of Fredo and how he kind of thought, if he had spent more time with Michael and stuff, if he wouldn't have turned. But it's all kind of complex. It's all it's Michael's fault as well, of course. It's all so layered, this film. There's so much to talk about. But that'd be more of an analysis, kind of video, and how maybe just more discussions on The Godfather in the future. These two films in particular. We'll see what I think of the third. I'll be watching that in a few weeks. I think I need to give it a break because clearly there's such a jump, or a difference in quality between these two and the third, and it's completely separate. As Coppola has referred to it, kind of an epilogue rather than another part. It's more, because this film, as we know, how could you really justly, continue this story? Very hard to do, and I think actually more kind of hard to do, many years later. But then again, I can see what was going on there, but we'll see what I think of that film. But for me, across the trilogy, people have their favourites, but I personally say that the second part is the finest, and just the most meaningful to me, and it's the most, it gives me the most chills, the epic moments, the operatic nature, just the way I respond to cinema, at its heights. I think this one does it for me, just a bit more than the first. Not like it's, a completely different ballpoint. I do think it's, comparable, but I think in pretty much every regard, I think this one goes, just further, and it has definitely more of a feeling to me, and nostalgic, but also more tragic and sad. But it's just more invested. I get more wrapped up in the family, even more so. And yes, if you're wondering what I'm going to give this film, no doubt, absolutely, my very highest rating of 100% plus, tier S. An absolute magnum opus. This defines, a magnum opus to me. It's one of the 10 best films ever made, probably. It really is something else, and that's something to say. Across how many years we've had of cinema. To say a film's one of the 10 best or even 25 best is really certainly praised. And I think without hesitation, this would be one of my picks. And yes, just once again, I am completely devastated by this film. I am enlightened. I am taken to another place spiritually. I'm just thankful for this gift. That Coppola and everyone involved, of course, brought this to the screen here. I think everyone deserved the praise they got for this film. What wonderful individuals, and just how this is so meaningful, clearly for Coppola as well. There's such a passion put into this, and the real meaning behind the culture that's brought into the film, and the American dream, the way it's portrayed, and how this really does. I think it's more dealing with more fine-tuned personal themes in this one. I think it's just real. It really hits some nerves here. This film. It really is a powerful experience, and the way it ends up, you can predict. You really couldn't, but then you kind of could. It's one of them films that's kind of, it's the tragic film that is being portrayed in different kind of works. Maybe Shakespearean, of course, at times. This one, in many regards, this film is just a culmination of so much. But it's very, in a particular way, it's very devastating, this one, and kind of just so felt, personally. It's something that I connect to all these characters from the first, and it's and some people would say, oh, it's kind of easy to kind of top the original in a series of films, but no, definitely not, definitely not, because. And this film is doing something completely different. This is not a typical sequel. Really, it could be the most unique sequel that I've seen. Just in the way that this is a parallel, and it's a prequel and a sequel, and it's it's doing something completely different, while also completely part of the same universe, same world building here. That Coppola done with the first. That's why I do count them as a One Piece on my favourite films list, and I do, if I separated them, the part two would be, higher than this a bit, but higher than the first, but on this list. But I do think it's part of the same piece of cinema here, really, and I think just a flawless magnum opus for me. It's beyond perfection. It's some film, some creation here. I think it's one of the most moving films. It's one of the most epic, grand, majestic undertakings in cinema. The production. Is there's no way I doubt that I'm in this world when I'm watching it. That's all I'll say there. It's such a perfect recreation, and it's got the gritty moments, of course, the very brutal moments, but I think it's just I think a bit more sophisticated as well than the first, and more spiritual, more pure, and just pure cinema here. I think the visual storytelling is even finer. I think the editing comes into this. The transitions are just heavenly. They really are. It's a wonderful film in the way it portrays family. Once again, I think it deepens this. It deepens the mythology, and you see just to see these characters when they're children and stuff, and the whole kind of interactions with the family. It's so warm and full of heart. This film, and uplifting, and I think. And you see that scene at the end, and it just makes you think back to the first one once again. But then you've got that, that final shot of Michael on his own, and that push in there, that moment where we kind of slowly come closer to Michael, and he could not be more far apart from the rest of his family at that point. It's a wonderful moment, but very, very sad to see. Very emotional thinking about that moment, actually. Yes, that's the power of this film. It really has an effect, that's for sure. This is a sweeping, majestic magnum opus, but it's so brutal and devastating. It's uplifting. It's got moments of comedy. The charm to the film. It's bringing from kind of Italian cinema. Especially once again. And even more so in the film. Vito, the flashbacks with Clemenza and Tessio, the friendship between them, the way it's portrayed, and the whole kind of rise and them meeting, it's such a joyous moment. It's so uplifting, and a moment to cherish and just enjoy, and it's going further for what was created from the first, but it's not, hinging on this. It's not kind of relying on this to achieve, what it's going for. It's just kind of deepening and kind of going further. But I think the two films enrich each other. The actors one in many ways, but again, it's so different from the first. But it's just complete. It's a complete experience. I think there is, of course, a version where you watch it all in one, chronological. But maybe I wouldn't like that as much. That's for sure. But it's certainly a thing that I think I advise going watching these in quick succession, maybe, because it's just such a journey. Of course, I love epic films, and this one of my dream films. Well, the first one is, and then this, as I say, quite shockingly for me, it just goes even further, an even finer film, and yes, pretty much one of the 10 best films ever made, in my opinion. Family, betrayal, honour, loyalty, legacy. You've got romance. You've got the American dream. I could go on with the themes explored in this film, but the execution is unmatched. This is one of the finest films, and it just is a mind-blowing and wondrous you know, atmospheric, spiritual experience that I've never seen another film quite like this one. It's one of them films, you know, it's something to behold, and I think we'll wrap up. Probably talked for nearly an hour now, but this film, you know, if you've not seen this film, yes, certainly, yes, try to get around to it if you can, and give it a go. And yes, for me personally, I do think it's better than the first, and yeah, just share your thoughts on this film and your experience with the film, and you know, what your favourite is of the trilogy, and again, just a respectful, you know, kind of sharing of ideas. You know, I always think it's great to have you know, a pick of the two. You know, particularly of course maybe these first two, but again, you know, it doesn't really matter. Of course, it's just you know, personal opinion. When it's cinema, you know, this good, you know, and these two films are so wonderful in their own right, I think it really doesn't matter too much. But it's nice to see, you know. So yes, I look forward to the comment section on this, and yes, thanks for watching, of course, and I will be reviewing, of course, the third part, you know, in a few weeks, and of course, Apocalypse Now, I'm waiting for the final cut to come, whenever that is, you know, it keeps, I think the date has changed, it's going to be delivered, but I cannot wait to see that again. I'll be watching the original version though, but in the 4K, you know, the presentation, so cannot wait to talk about that finally, as well. But for me, this is the finest Coppola film, and one of the very finest in cinema. You know, a true haunting, you know, mind-blowing, epic, intimate, you know, spiritual magnum opus. What can I say? You know, it's The Godfather Part 2. And yes, I watched it once again, and once again, truly moved by this experience. This is some film. This is cinema, and yes. Thanks so much for watching my review.